everyone, my name is Tina Huang. I'm a Director of Queen City Law, and today we have Roger Thompson again visiting to explain to us GST implications. Roger, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Roger Thompson. I'm a Director at Bentley's Chartered Accountants, and I've been practicing for over 40 years, specialising in taxation.
40 years is a long time,
It is
so
a
you
long
must
time.
really know your tax and GST.
Yes, I've picked up a little bit along the way.
So what is GST?
Okay, so GST, short for Goods and Services Tax, is a type of value added tax. And what that means is that the tax is intended to be imposed on the end consumer. It's not supposed to be a tax on businesses, but the tax is generally collected at various stages along the way, with businesses charging the next business, but they claim it back until we get to the final end consumer is the one who has to pay all the tax and can't claim it back.
And are there exceptions?
Oh, there's a lot of exceptions. Some of the main ones, residential rental is quite a common one that we'll come across where there's no GST. The other one is financial services, which typically includes things like interest payments, dividend payments, some insurance, and so on. So those are generally exempt from GST, but most other things that you buy, any goods that you buy from the shop or from a retailer will have GST on them, and services that you get, for example, legal fees or accounting fees or doctor's fees, anything like that will generally have GST.
So I go to the supermarket, I buy some milk, I'm paying GST on that.
Yeah.
But I rent a house,
Yeah.
I'm not paying GST on my rent.
That's correct, Tina. GST is like a very clever tax because you generally are not aware that you're paying it. When you go and buy your stuff at the supermarket, you're not really aware that if you bought $100 of groceries, you've sort of paid $15 of tax to the government while you were doing so. So it's a very clever tax in that way that there's not that much public resistance because you don't realise that you're paying it at the time.
Now, there appears to be almost a misnomer in people thinking GST will only apply to commercial properties and not to residential properties. But what's your say on that? Because it's causing issues for people where they're signing agreements to buy properties. Sometimes GST is involved, sometimes it's not. But there's a almost presumption that if you're buying a house to live in, that GST won't be at play. But it does often come into play, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. So as somebody who's purchasing a house, one of the things that needs to be looked at very carefully is who are you purchasing it from? And if, for example, you've purchased it not from somebody else who's been living in the house, because that'll generally be a private seller to a private buyer, but if you bought it from somebody who's perhaps they're a property developer or a builder and they've built the house, or they've bought the house and refurbished it or done something, subdivided the property or whatever, then you could be buying from a GST registered person.
Right.
And the problem with that is if the contract says plus GST, you might think you're paying, say, $1 million to buy the property, but in fact, when you come to the settlement, you've got to pay $1.15 million.
Yes, and so I think that's the difficulty there, where you have an agreement and most people think, oh, the purchase price is $1 million. So I've got a diagram, Roger.
Yes.
I've tried to be clever.
Yes.
Where the agreement says the purchase price is including GST,
yes,
if any, and that if any always gets people because it's not clear whether there is any GST applicable. But say they've signed an agreement to purchase a house for $1 million, including GST, if any.
Yeah.
Now, the purchaser will only ever pay $1 million, won't
that's
they?
Correct. That's correct. And that's, as a purchaser, I think the best position is always to have a contract that says including GST,
if any,
because then
yes.
the price can't be increased by GST.
Right. And if GST does apply, then it's up to the vendor to take a hit on that and pay the GST.
That's
right?
correct. It's the vendor's responsibility if there's any GST.
Right. And then I have another diagram for if it says plus GST, if any, or excluding GST, if any.
Yeah.
So on that, you could have a poor mum and dad purchase or buy a residential house to live in, but when it so happens that they are buying off a trader or a builder or a developer,
Yes.
they could end up having to pay GST on top of that.
That's exactly
they?
right. And there's an emerging category of vendor that is also quite dangerous, and that's somebody who's been operating the property as like an Airbnb property,
yes.
because they could be GST registered, and when if they sell the property to an unregistered person, there could be GST on the sale, and it may not be obvious to you when you're buying the property that you are buying from a registered person, and so you've got to be very careful in that situation.
Right. And you could have it the other way, right, where you think you're buying it from a private family and you're a trader and you intend to claim GST back, but if it so happens that they're also registered for GST,
yes,
you're not going to be able to claim that GST back, right?
That's quite right. So there is a situation where if a registered person buys a property from an unregistered person and they're intending to use that for some GST type taxable activity, whether it's a property development or it could be Airbnb, then they can be entitled to claim back the GST, a notional GST amount that's included in the price, even though you're buying from an unregistered person. It's what we call a second-hand goods credit, and you can claim a proportion of the price as a GST refund. And that can be quite attractive, but bear in mind if you do that, that when you come to sell the property, then you've got to deal with GST.
Pay back GST again, yeah. And then you have complications where part of the property might be used as a taxable supply, right? Where you can have a farm on one part and then a house on the other, or you have a sort of operational cafe or something in part of the property, and then the GST only applies to that part of the property, right?
That's right. It's possible to have. So generally speaking, if it's a person's home and they're selling that home to another person who's going to use it as a home, that will be exempt from GST. Yeah, it gets more complicated when the home's on a business property like a farm, for example, or it could be that there's a building and the top floor is used as the home and the bottom floor is a shop or something like that. So in those cases, you would generally do an apportionment and split the price between the GST part that's going to be subject to GST and the residential part that won't be subject to GST.
And then the valuation of that is going to be very important, and how much of that
can be very important.
And again, good accounting advice on that, right?
Yeah. And again, you'll probably find that depending on the circumstances of the buyer and seller, they might have quite different objectives and what they're trying to get that price split as. So it can be a complicated issue that definitely should get advice.
Yes, I think over the last few years we've also been seeing lots of fights and disputes on GST because people aren't reading the little caption where it says including or excluding, and they've just signed away thinking that the price is the price. Yeah,
that's so critical to check that, and I think if there's any doubt at all, really you must get advice from the lawyers who are dealing with it, which I would recommend Queen City Law, of course.
And I would recommend Bentley's to get accounting advice on this. And you've got to get it right because it could cost more.
It could cost a lot. And we've talked about an example of $1 million, but $1 million is now, the average price in Auckland is more than $1 million, and we could easily be talking 4 or 5 times that is not untypical. So it's very important to get it right.
Right. Do you have any other comments about GST that?
GST, I've found in general has been, although it appears to be quite a simple tax, it's actually quite a complicated tax, and particularly on property purchases, on business purchases,
Yes.
those sorts of transactions, it is quite complicated. And I've done quite a lot of expert witness work where professional people have not given the right advice on GST on those sorts of transactions and have got it wrong. And there's a surprising amount of cases that there is a GST problem comes up. So I think it is, I could just only stress that it's really important. You know, everybody, it's a bit like going to the dentist. You don't probably want to pay too much in legal fees and accounting fees, but sometimes that
It can save
as
you.
a small fee
Yeah.
can save you a lot of pain down the track.
Yes, because we have seen people be involved in fights over GST for years, and it's often cost them more than the GST amount at hand to fight it out.
Yeah.
So it's a hard one and it's tricky.
Yes.
Yeah. So there you have it, folks. GST appears to be a simple topic, but does need good quality advice from somebody like Roger at Bentley's, and good legal advice from somebody like us at Queen City Law. So if you have any queries, please feel free to contact us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.